Hey there troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and a lot of you guys have asked me about tanks for Tactical Tuesday. You know, I've had lots of questions about what considerations should be made when using a tank. Is there anything in particular that you need to think about whilst using a vehicle in order to really be effective with it? Well, the answer to that is yes, and I've compiled a quick pro tips list today that I'm going to go through with some tank gameplay in the background, just to give you guys some ideas of things that you can be doing to significantly improve how you play as a tanking player. So the first one is that the tank is both a defensive element and offensive element. I know there's this general debate in the Battlefield community that tanks, should be bossing all objectives and blah blah blah, but that simply isn't the case. Tanks are very important for infantry, just as infantry is very important to tanking. And you need to understand that when you move as a tank, you can also become a defensive element for your team. This isn't a situation whereby you immediately have to attack every single objective. Tanks can do stuff as simple as taking out a ridgeline by themselves that actually advances gameplay better on objectives than the tank actually being on that specific objective. There was an instance during the gameplay today where an entire ridgeline of snipers opened up on all of my teammates moving from D to C, and it was actually more sensible for me to go and attack that ridgeline and take out the threats and suppress them than it was for me to go into the objective and try and capture it myself, because it allowed a smoother transition of players and it allowed that defensive capability of a tank to really advance the overall flow of the map, as opposed to really just being considered one attacking element on an objective. 2, and this is an important one, is that tanks need to travel in packs. Just because you are this large vehicle doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable, and if you can travel with 1 or 2 tanks, then you're definitely making your life a hell of a lot easier. As a larger vehicle, you are naturally more predisposed to attracting more attention, and more importantly, attracting the attention of things like Panzerfausts. And when you have that extra tank, you have that extra scope, that extra eye, like having extra gunners on your tank in itself. People that are capable of taking out threats quicker than you are, and will add an extra dimension of safety to your gameplay as a larger vehicle. Number 3, traveling with infantry is important. This is something that really kind of bothers me. A lot of people, this is a general debate in the community, that tank has to go and do X, Y, Z, and it has to do it by itself. That's simply not the case. Infantry will always be faster and more maneuverable than a tank, and because of that, traveling without them would be nonsensical. There are some positions like higher grounds where it does make sense for a tank to go solo and try and, really try and apply some pressure, but in a lot of situations, especially moving between objectives, it's really important to have that layer of infantry, not only because your tanking presence will attack an objective or an area significantly better with infantry around them, but again, it also adds that layer of safety to you as a vehicle because more threats are being taken care of actively by other people. It's no longer a case of you just having to one-man them by yourself, but the sheer terror of the tank and the sheer fact that it is such a brutal vehicle will add a spearheaded tip to your offensive component as well, and this is something worth remembering. Number 4, and arguably the most important for me, is to only invade objectives with infantry. You'll see it today in this mission and in this general map that I play, that there's a few times where I push C, but I only push C when I either have another vehicle strong enough with me to counteract what's going on, or if I have a large amount of infantry around me for me to make that push. These guys were looking at me to bust down the doors, they were looking for somebody to make that initial disruption and attract some attention, and that's exactly what I went ahead and did. I got a couple of kills, I blasted up the place, and I made it difficult for people. I made it difficult for the people on the objective to carry on and ignore my presence, and because of that, I attracted more attention away from their defensive approach on infantry, and that meant that the infantry that was with me had a better edge as well. And I really do recommend that whenever you go into an objective, you make sure there is sufficient amount of infantry around you, not only because this will be really important to your attack, but it means as a tank you have the extra layer of safety, and it also means that you are detracting attention away from them, meaning that they can make a meaningful push on the objective. Now this links in at number 5, and that is simply do not stop firing. Don't stop firing. When you're on these objectives, carry on shooting. Just fire anything. Fire everything. Literally like the Star Trek. Fire everything. At no point should you really be letting go of the trigger when you're on these objectives. It should be a very big rarity. You really just need to, kick up a fuss. You need to break some shit. Whether or not you're actually killing people isn't that important. You just need to cause chaos, mayhem, and a distraction, and be that kind of first through the door. You're effectively the equivalent of a human flashbang inside a vehicle. You know, you're going in, kicking up a fuss, making a bunch of noise and sound, and attracting all the attention to yourself. And that's exactly what you need to do. And honestly, even if you get a bit of splash damage here or there, that extra 30 or 40 health off of an enemy may be the edge that an infantryman on your side needs in order to get the kill, or simply just to perform better as a player. Number 6, and this is pretty important, is to suppress positions. You know, use a tank because you have that ability to lay down suppressive fire without being prone to bullets really does make you an edge cutter. You know, it makes that ability very important for you, because it means that you can detract sniper rifles away from people, you can really lay down the fire on people firing MMGs. You know, just ultimately in general, you are something that can get rid of entire firing positions with a cannon and a machine gun by suppressing it. You don't necessarily have to kill them, but you'll see a few times in the footage today that simply applying enough pressure meant that these guys had to move. There was no way they could carry on sitting in that position, because I made sure that that position was no longer tenable. Number 7 for me is pretty important, and that is do not be afraid to retreat. You know, in Battlefield 5, it is understandable. Tanks can, to most degrees, be that really big breakthrough unit that can make a difference on an objective. But at the same time, if the situation gets too hot, a dead tank is useless. A tank that's moved elsewhere is much better. You know, you'd rather be alive elsewhere, rearming, recharging, as opposed to just being flat out dead. You know, that's a longer delay, and it's something you don't want in any given position. And I really think, in general, just being actively aware that you can retreat from objectives, and you can rearm, you can, you know, heal, is really important, and don't be afraid to do that. I did that a lot during the video that you'll see today. Number 8, and this is important, is threat prioritization. A lot of people tend to think in Battlefield that certain threats aren't as important when in fact they are. In most scenarios, I'd actually argue that some infantry with Panzerfausts are more important than the tank in the distance trying to fire at you. This is something that I honestly don't really think a lot of people get a good grasp of, but in a lot of situations, an up-close and personal infantryman should be your number 1 priority if they're using a Panzerfaust, AT mines, dynamite, anything, because they can do a lot of damage in a short space of time, and they can continue to dish out a considerable amount of damage as well. You know, a tank that's somewhere off in the distance is not going to cause you too much stress. And when you actually invade with multiple different tanks, if you've got, you know, 2 tanks coming at you at a different time, I'd actually prioritize the smaller ones. The faster ones are more maneuverable, which means they can cause you more issues from behind, but more importantly, they'll go down first than you will. You know, the smaller tanks are prone to more damage, and that means that you can take one element that's dealing you damage off the board first. Finally, and arguably one of the most important ones, is movement. More important, moving laterally. A lot of people in Battlefield don't really seem to understand when tanking that as a vehicle, you really just need to stay on your toes and carry on moving between locations, even when you're stuck in an engagement. You know, when you take on a tank, what you really need to be doing is making that tank's job of hitting you as difficult as possible. Keep moving, move backwards, move sideways. Make it hard for him to pinpoint that shell that's going to make the difference. And more importantly, do things like get foliage and objects in the way of you. If you can do things like using wreckages or using, you know, small dips and dives and gullies as a means of counteracting some of the problems that you'll face when engaging a tank, then you've done a good job. Another really important key aspect of this is moving laterally, and this is something you can do at distance. When at distance and engaging a tank at long ranges, it's actually best just to move side to side. Don't move back and forth, because that will make it incredibly hard to range your own shells. But if you move side to side, you have the same range on your shells, whilst just making it difficult for their shells to really do anything meaningful, and that's something I highly recommend doing whilst opening up in an engagement. Another add-on clause that I thought I'd add at the end is just that you can really make the most out of tanks if you treat them kind of like a helicopter in Battlefield 4. You know, a helicopter in Battlefield 4 was really strong because you had the gunner position that basically allowed 2 people to become some dynamic thunder duo that just made everybody's day hell on that server. And the same applies to vehicles now with tanks. You know, you really have the ability there to have a front gunner, maybe even a top gunner, and the top gunner also has the position to crouch now. It has the ability to hide and make it less prone to its head being blown off by a sniper rifle. And when all 3 of those units are working in coordination on a tank, They're honestly simply one of the best units on the field, and I highly recommend getting a squad together and maining a tank together as a unit that's ultimately using defensive capabilities, repairing one another. The support class of course still has the repair tool, but also as a medic you can lay down smoke grenades and make it more difficult, or as an assault you can lay down that extra Panzerfaust that might make the difference during an engagement. So troops, that's about it from me today, the Tactical Brit. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, and is there anything else you want me to cover in Tactical Tuesday? As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next video.